In this video I'm building a super sturdy desk with these beautiful black steel legs. To start this build I cut out 24 pieces of 48 by 30mm planks down to around 2 meters. I would also cut 4 lengths of about 1 meter that I would cover in packing tape on one side so glue wouldn't stick to them. I laid down 2 of the taped pieces on the ground and placed all the 2 meter lengths on top. Then I applied wood glue to all of them. Then I put the other taped piece on top to straighten everything, followed by 4 long clamps to squeeze everything together. I also clamped the 2 crossing planks on each side to make sure everything stayed flat until it dried. About a day later, when the glue had dried, I used an electric planer to remove the excess glue and the roughest parts of the surface, followed by a belt sander with some 60 grit paper to smooth everything out. Then I made a straight line on one side to get one fine edge, using an old floorboard as a straight edge when I made the cut. Then measured out the length of the table and subtracted the distance from the edge of the saw to the blade, and cut the desk to its final size. After cutting it to size, I would flip it around and plane the underside as well, followed by the belt sander once again. At this point I mixed some wood glue and sawdust that I collected during the sanding and used it to fill in any cracks or inconsistencies in the surface. Once that had dried up, I went at it again with the belt sander to remove any excess glue and sawdust. I finished up the whole thing with some 120 grit paper on my random Orbital sander, making sure to round off all edges as well as the sides. Then it was time to apply some paint to it. First I removed any surface dust, then I used some white furniture paint applied with a roller. Once the underside was dry, I flipped the board around and painted the top. This time I used a brush, because I wanted the desk to have that brushed look once it was finished. Also, the reason why I went out in the sun for this part was for it to dry faster, leaving those brush marks. Now it was time to make the legs. These were made from 40 by 40mm square steel tubes cut at a 45-degree angle. I had to make a total of 8 pieces, 4 for the height and 4 for the depth of the legs. Then I welded the corners together, followed by an angle grinder with a sandpaper flat disc. I am in no way a great welder as I'm still kind of new at this, but I think it turned out pretty good. When the 2 frames were finished, I measured the width between the 2 sides of the squares and cut 2 pieces of 20 by 20mm steel tubes that I welded together and then welded in place, centered inside the metal frame, just as a nice looking detail on the legs. Then I would go over all the welding joints with the flap disc and also round off the sharp edges a little bit. To attach the legs to the desk, I drilled 3 smaller holes for some screws from the top and down through the entire steel tube. Then I drilled the inside holes with a bigger drill bit large enough to fit the screw head through, so the screws would be hidden inside the tube. To stiffen up the legs for sideways movement, I made 2 L-shaped brackets that would be welded onto the legs in the back and attached with screws to the rear of the desk. Before applying paint, I went over the surface with acetone to remove any grease and dust so the paint would stick better. Then I sprayed on a few coats of matte black paint and let it dry. To mount the legs, I measured about 5 cm from the edge and mounted 1 screw in the back. Then I measured the same distance from the edge in the front. Then I put screws inside the holes that I previously drilled. Inserting the screws in the holes was actually a bit tricky, and I wish I had made bigger holes because I couldn't really see much and actually ended up dropping a few screws inside of the legs. But it didn't really bother me, as I wouldn't really move it around much anyways. After inserting the screws, I added a few more screws in the rear and also double checked that the leg was leveled. The final touch was to add some furniture pads to protect the floor, as well as attaching a LED strip to the back of the desk. And here's the finished result. I think it turned out great. Price-wise, it's a little pricey compared to buying one from, let's say, IKEA. The total price ended up around $150 in materials, and that's if you already have the tools available. But gluing wood like this just locks it together in all directions and makes it insanely strong, and it does not flex at all even when I jump on it. I'm super happy with this build, and I also learned a lot during the process. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to leave a like or subscribe to the channel. Maybe also check out my other videos. Thank you for watching.